Okay, so we're talking about photosynthesis. We're gearing up to actually discuss photosynthesis. We just have to explain some things before we do so. So we did a little chemistry last time. We kind of broke down the formula for photosynthesis, and we talked about oxidation reduction reactions and the transfer of those electrons. And again, the electrons are where the money is. So, shoot, I don't know how to get rid of that. Electrons are where the money is, and so whenever we do these type of uh, metabolic activities, we should follow those electrons because that's going to be where the payout is. So now we have to back up and do a little physics, and we have to talk about the nature of light and light energy. Um, and obviously, this isn't going to be kind of hardcore physics. So um, Dr. Sims might yell at me, but it's going to be enough so that we can understand the kind of nature of light and why plants are colored the way that they are. And so here's the energy of the sun now here, and as it hits the earth, it has a variety of different kind of wavelengths of energy that is hitting us. Um, the longer wavelengths are things like radio waves, infrared rays that, I don't know, they still make remote controls out of using infrared. Nowadays it's all like Bluetooth or something like that. But originally infrared, uh, UV radiation, things that cause sunburn, um, um, X-rays, and gamma rays up at the top. So there's a relationship between the wavelength of the light and the energy. So the longer the wavelength, the lower the energy. So radio waves don't have a lot of energy, but these shorter wavelength guys do. Now, we see our whole visual spectrum is in one narrow band of the energy that's bombarding us from the sun. We call that the visible light spectrum. So everything that we see is within that one little band of energy. And that goes from 740 nanometers on the high end to 400 nanometers on the um, low end. And if you remember from grade school or wherever, we can kind of break down that visible light spectrum via the Roy G. Biv, which is what, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, right? And so pigments are things that absorb particular wavelengths of light. And when we have something like right now, you can't see, but I'm wearing a red shirt. And the way that works is that red shirt is absorbing all wavelengths of visible light but red. So because it's not absorbing red, it is reflected back and to my eyeballs. Um, And we'll see that that kind of becomes important in understanding why plants are green. Okay, so what happens when a pigment absorbs the energy of that light is that it excites the electrons in that pigment. And so here's a photon of light, boom, it hits an electron, it excites it to push it up to a high energy state. And we are photosynthetic organisms capture these high energy electrons in order to do work. So here, this is shown here. You have a photon, it hits an electron, boom, it pops it up to the next electron shell. This is a high energy electron. Now, there are actually two fates for this electron. It can either go back down to its ground state, right? Or it can be passed to another atom and activates that one. So the energy can be passed to another atom, right? So you can have something in which we have a photon of light, it activates an electron, but then that electron just goes right back to its old state. Now that is a wasted energetic process. Um, Nothing really kind of goes from that except the, what we call phosphorescence. But we can take this high energy electron and we can pass it around until we're able to use it. And that's what photosynthetic organisms do. Their leaves are arranged in such a way so as to capture the energy of the sunlight. Ooh, let me make this orange. So capture the energy of the sunlight, activate some electrons. Those electrons pop around until the cell is able to do something with them. The way it happens is that they have organelles called chloroplasts. They should have done this in the last chapter, a couple of chapters ago. And these chloroplasts are packed with a chemical called chlorophyll that allows for these electrons to become activated. And so this is the chloroplast here. So these are organelles within the cell. They are a bimembrane structure. And within them, they have these things called thylakoids. And so the thylakoids are actually going to be the place in which the photons hit the chlorophyll molecules and we'll see form a concentration gradient of protons that allow for work to be done. These thylakoids are embedded within this matrix called the stroma, and the stroma is the place where the sugars are made. So chloroplasts have thylakoids that are packed with chlorophyll. The chlorophyll are actually the pigments that will absorb the energy of the sun and move around its electrons in response. And then it's embedded in this jelly called the stroma, which is the site of sugar creation. Photosynthesis, oops, is actually two different parts. There is the photo part, which is the part that requires light, and that is using the energy of light in order to make chemical energy in the form of ATP and NADPH. And then there's the synthesis part, which is using the ATP and NADPH in order to make sugar. And this is what the chlorophyll looks like. It has this kind of long hydrophobic area, and then it has the pigment here. And this is built in such a way so that it can accept a photon of light and then allow for electrons to pop up and become activated. And here, if you just have this chlorophyll up in a tube, you can see when you have light, it looks green. And if you turn off that light, it actually glows red, um, uh, or the pigment is red, and this is simply those activated electrons now just going back down to its ground state. And if you remember from Roy G. Biv, green is of higher energy than red. So as it goes back down to its ground state, you lose some of that energy. And so these chloroplasts have these chlorophyll arranged in systems called antenna systems. And these systems are designed so that they can take the energy of sunlight, electrons can be activated within these chlorophylls, and they can pass those electrons around until they hit a special chlorophyll molecule. This is like a chlorophyll star, and this chlorophyll star molecule pushes these high energy electrons into what's called an electron transport chain. So essentially, you have a photon, it comes in, it hits these antenna systems, the electron gets activated in one of these chlorophyll, and that electron bounces around these chlorophylls until it's ready to get to this chlorophyll A molecule, which passes it out of the system. At that point, there's a little bit of work that has to be done, but essentially the antenna system, uh, well, one, they have to restore the electron that's lost, and then once that happens, they are ready to take in another photon um, and start this process all over again. That's kind of what's shown here. Here you have the energy of the sun. It hits an electron, activates that electron within the thylakoid of this chlorophyll molecule. This high energy electron is valuable now, and it gets passed to another molecule. And so the energy from this electron gets passed to another chlorophyll. It activates that electron. It gets passed to another chlorophyll, activates that one, until finally these electrons go to a special chlorophyll that shoots it out of the system. And here you can look at were we in class, I'd be doing this whole like data analysis thing. But here you can look at the absorption, I can't spell, of these chlorophyll molecules in terms of visible light. And you should see there are three chlorophylls, chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and the carotenoids. And if you look at this, what happens? Chlorophyll A has pretty good absorption in the blue range, right? And then this is this dark green, and it has absorption in the orange to red range, right? Chlorophyll B has absorption in the indigo and violet range, right? And it absorbs in the yellow and orange range, right? And the carotenoids absorb a little bit further out into that green, and then that's about it. And so if you look between the three of these, chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and the carotenoids, then you can see that you have good absorption in almost every part of the visible light spectrum except for green light, right? And so what happens? These leaves can absorb all of the visible light except for green, and so therefore the leaves that we see are green because that's the only thing that it has a poor absorbing capability for. And you can also see, well, I'll show you this on the next slide. Here in the fall, what happens? So in spring, we have high levels of chlorophyll, high levels of chlorophyll B, lower levels of the carotenoids, but still some. And so you're absorbing everything but green, and so we see green leaves. In the fall, what happens? The plant breaks down chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, so there's less of that being produced, but it doesn't, it maintains its carotenoids. And so what happens? The leaves change color. We no longer see um, just the green. You have relatively low absorbance of the orange and reds, and you get these beautiful fall foliage. Oops, shoot, I can't spell. But anyway, because of that, right? And so that's simply because you no longer have the chlorophyll in there to absorb the pigments that they used to absorb. And so you're left with the carotenoids, which can only do less work. Okay, So I'm going to stop here, and then we're going to finally get into actual photosynthesis on the next. On the next